The use of tillage within conservation farming systems is a controversial issue. One of the objectives of conservation farming was to minimise the use of tillage and retain stubbles, and that would conserve the soil and we wouldn't have big dust storms, and that all made sense. But how do you control weeds when you don't till? We spray a lot of chemicals over the countryside. And some marketing genius once convinced us that spraying chemicals all over the countryside was better than just running a plough through and controlling weeds. There's a potential problem there because it could be that there are herbicide residues in the soil. It could be that they make it into the food chain. This could be one of those circumstances where conventional wisdom might have its problems. My temper tantrum was, I became aware that tillage was not popular, but I had been pushing liming for years. And top dress lime just doesn't work. It sits there. You get a pH of 6 or 7 in the top inch of soil and the acidity remains. And the fact is, when you sow your seed, even canola, you sow 1 to 3 centimetres deep, and cereal seeds could be sown 5 centimetres deep if you're chasing moisture, so the plant doesn't see that liming. And I thought, this is nuts. You can't on one hand have no till and have a liming system, because the liming just doesn't move in the soil. And I started getting a bit upset about this. I thought, there's a very obvious contradiction in terms here. It's obvious why farmers get cranky with us. How can we say to you, use direct drilling or use discs and have complete no-till, but incorporate your lime, cultivate just before sowing to control rhizoctonia, put out mouse baits, but you're going to have to break up their burrows and bury the grain so they don't have a food source. And the contradictions just went on. And I made a long list of all these contradictions, and I was doing a temper tantrum at the pool one day instead of swimming, just ranting and raving to the poor guy sitting next to me who happened to be a professor of soils at CSU. The poor guy was sitting there wanting to swim his laps while I was ranting and raving, and he said, well, you do something. So we did. We went to GRDC and got a project on the strategic use of tillage within conservation farming systems. So the bottom line is, people have been ploughing for 4,000 years. Were they nuts? Was it just because they didn't have herbicides? Are herbicides environmentally friendly and inane? Can we just get away with herbicides and not use any weed control by tillage? So the idea of this project was that we went and looked at a number of sites that might make agronomic sense to till, such as coming out of a 5-year lucerne phase where you often have a slug or snail problem. People often cultivate there before going into a cropping phase. Post-liming within a continuous cropping system, we need to incorporate the lime. Post a green manure crop that was worked into the soil. Often if you leave a green manure crop on the surface, it just blows away, so a lot of guys work it into the soil. We took circumstances like that and we went to those paddocks and we compared ongoing no-till with scarifying, with offset discs, and in a couple of cases with rotary hoe. Then we looked at a whole range of soil chemical, physical, and at 2 sites biological properties of the soil to see what happened to the soil, what changes took place, and if there was anything detrimental, how long did it take the soil to recover from that strategic use of tillage. And most of the data that I've analysed so far is on the soil structure, and we've used things like wet aggregate stability primarily, and that's basically how resistant are the PEDs in the soil to break down in water as our measure of soil structure. The results were very diverse at different sites and under different treatments. It is quite true that even a single tillage can do some damage to soil structure. Not always, but some site years there was damage to soil structure. And that was disappointing. It did mean that there was an element of truth to the idea that we really needed to minimise tillage. But the good news was that in some of those cases, the damage was cured, if you like, within 1 to 2 years. In some cases, 3-4 years later, the damage was still statistically significant. The difference was the residues that were returned to the soil. The simple principle is that the glue that holds soil structure together is fresh organic residues. That's what the fungi get into. It's those organic residues and fungal hyphae that hold soil structure together. If you return fresh residues, such as pastures, you can rotary hoe the soil, and a year or two later you'd never know you'd done any damage. On the other hand, if you're only returning cereal straw to the soil, that doesn't actually do much for soil organic matter. It's low nitrogen, low sulphur, low phosphorus. It doesn't build a lot of biological activity. The recovery of the soil is very slow in these sorts of circumstances. The lower the quantity of residues returned to the soil, the slower the recovery of soil structure from strategic tillage. So there's probably nothing new in that. What's new is the context. If we're going to till the soil to control Rhizoctonia or mice or slugs and snails, or to incorporate lime, the more organic residues we can return to that soil, and the richer they are in nitrogen and phosphorus and sulphur, the more that we can feed the fungi and the bacteria in the soil, the quicker the soil structure will recover. So it's age-old principles applied to the modern farming system.